Hey everyone, my name is Johnny. I'm a musician from Toronto, Canada, and I just finished watching Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary on the Beatles, the three-part series that's on Disney Plus. And I just wanted to share my thoughts with you all about the documentary series coming from a musician such as myself that actually plays in a band called the Dreamboats that was inspired by the Beatles in many ways. And I'm a huge Beatles fan, so I just wanted to share my thoughts with you all, and I hope to start a bit of a conversation below if you've watched the documentary and get your thoughts on it too. And spoiler alert, I am going to be talking about the documentary as if you've seen it, so just keep that in mind. Anyways, here we go. So I'm a huge Beatles fan. My family's been listening to the Beatles since I was younger. I really got into them around the age of 13 when I could burn my first CDs. Sorry, guys. And I even have my mug here. I did not plan this. And I was so excited to watch this. And all I can say is this documentary was beautiful. It was a beautiful piece of work. It was like you were just a fly on the wall during such a pivotal moment in the band's history, a moment where tensions were high at times, a moment in time where you know that, a few months later, the Beatles would break up. It's just a very sensitive moment in the band's timeline, and to just be a fly on the wall for this entire recording process and all of the turmoil and the ups and downs and just the creative process in general of how the Beatles operated at this point in time without Brian Epstein was so fascinating to see as a Beatles fan. And I really like that Peter Jackson didn't include any audio overdubs, no announcer. There was nothing to fill it in. It was literally just raw footage. And it was almost like an Alan Lomax field recording, but in video. It was just like everything was captured, and it was raw and it was real, and you really got to learn about the Beatles. I think for people who haven't really dug deep into the Beatles in general, might have a preconceived notion of what each person was. They were kind of these larger than life characters, they were on lunch pails and they had figurines. But when you see this, you just realize they're people. And as a musician, you see these kind of micro tensions that exist at moments between band members, things that have probably been brewing for years, and it just turns into a bit of resentment. And then you see how they deal with it, though, when there's a serious conversation that needs to be had. No one is afraid to have that conversation. And it's just fascinating to see everyone's roles. I know with Paul McCartney, at least in my eyes, I always thought he was the guy who was in control and calling the shots. And you definitely get a sense of that in this documentary. However, it comes across in a different way. It feels like Paul is genuinely trying to get everyone to rally together for the betterment of the band during such a pivotal moment. And I could see that coming across as controlling maybe to the other members, but it seems from an outside perspective that Paul is only trying to align everyone and get the best output possible, whether that means telling people what to do or not. And I know that's something we've struggled with in our band, of people feeling like they can tell you what to do. And there's a fine line between creativity and bossing someone around. So it's interesting to see that dynamic and how it gets addressed later with John Lennon in the second episode. He just tells Paul in that very candid conversation that Paul needs to allow people to put their spin on it just for the betterment of the band. John, aside from having Yoko next to him at all times, John seemed to really come across as a person who's very wise, but wouldn't lead on to that necessarily. He's always trying different things, always coming up with melodies on the fly. Just, you can do no wrong. And it's so refreshing to see that environment, especially around everyone. They have people, they have their wives, they have kids running around, yet the boys can just focus in and they're in their own world and nothing will throw them off their game. So John really felt at moments like the stoic leader that was behind the scenes. And as Paul even mentions in their candid conversation in the second episode, he always feels like he's the second in command, Paul, and that John is the leader. And there's always that kind of respect. So it's very interesting to see that dynamic. George really came across as difficult in many moments, and I don't mean that as a disrespect to George. I only mean it in the sense that it feels like he has a lot of resentment and pent up issues with Paul and John even potentially, but it feels like more so Paul. And it's just a shame because I feel like he may have not had the opportunities to address that with Paul, and everything just kind of came to a boiling point. I don't think George was the kind of guy to not be into doing things or not be gung-ho for new ideas and projects, but it just feels like from an outside musician's perspective that there's just a bit of pent-up resentment and issues that George has with the band, and it just came to a boiling point where George just had to leave. It was just all too much. But it was really nice that John and Paul came together for that little conversation that was candidly recorded in the second episode. It was so key and it was so great to hear. They got together and they knew that they had to really deal with this issue with George and figure this out because they are brothers at the end of the day. That candid conversation really hit home. It was actually very emotional listening to that candid conversation because I've been in conversations like that with my band members before, especially the guy who started my band, the Dreamboats, with me, Chris. We always have these kind of hard conversations from time to time, and it just strengthens the band and it just helps you move forward with things. So it was so cool to see the Beatles take things seriously. Their egos were always put in check by one another, which I think was so nice to see. And finally, there was Ringo, and Ringo was very quiet for a lot of the documentary. I don't think because that's how he was per se, but I'm a drummer as well, and I know when musicians, people with instruments, are trying to come up with ideas, it's very hard to contribute from behind the drums. What I do, I start bringing a guitar because I also play guitar, and I contribute in that way. But it seems like Ringo really knew his role. As weird as that sounds, I feel like Ringo knew his role in the band, and that was just being available for what people are thinking for their ideas. Ringo, can you try this? Ringo, can you try this? And he'll just kind of do it and lets the magic happen. And for that, I really commend Ringo because I know that's hard to do. I know those can be very long days. I know there's power struggles that happen and you're just behind the drum kit, just taking it all in and trying to be professional. So it was interesting to see that from Ringo and how he kind of reacted to all of these situations. But his heart is in the right place. It was so fascinating to see how ideas came about, how guys brought their ideas to the table and worked through them. You just really get a sense of how things operated at this very tense moment in the band. But this documentary also kind of showed you behind the curtain of what it was actually like. There was all the tabloids saying George left the band and this guy got into a fight with this guy, but when they came together after making up with George, it just seemed like they were genuinely on the same terms again and they respected each other. And I feel like they just needed to put everyone in check for this project. A lot of the insecurities that I feel as a musician with my band, playing certain shows, should we do this, getting nervous, it was interesting to see them go through that whole kind of thought process as well. I know they wanted to play a show, but the thought of playing on the roof, I know right before that they had a bit of a powwow, a little bit of a meeting, because I'm sure they were extremely nervous having not performed for 3 years. That's crazy in the public eye. So I really felt connected with that feeling of uncertainty and the fact that they rose above it. Even being a band that was on top of the world, the fact that they could always push the envelope and say, no, this is what we have to do is very inspiring. And as a huge Beatles fan, it was so cool to hear some of the earliest Lennon McCartney tunes that they wrote during the Quarrymen days. And even hearing a lot of the covers they were doing, it was really nice to hear. You hear them talking about, back in Hamburg, we had this and we had a good PA, there's all this kind of, that's my bad Liverpool accent. They talk about some of the old days and it was still so fresh to them. And what I really got out of this documentary, aside from the Beatles writing amazing songs, is that they're just genuinely interesting, relatable, and real people. They're working class guys. They always seem to remember where they came from and their roots, and they don't come across as feeling better than anyone, at least people working around them. I was just really captivated for the entire series. Every single episode, I was just locked in. I had the lights off and it was so good. I will say there were many moments where I was really almost brought to tears because it hit home so much with my band. Just feeling these kind of tensions and these feelings of we've been through so much together, how can this kind of happen? I would say that one of the most emotional moments, I think everyone would say this, is in the second episode after George left the band and the band comes to meet again on Monday. Ringo shows up and nobody else shows up. And eventually Paul shows up and he just sees that it's Ringo. And Paul says that one line where he's just like, and then there were two. And he kind of stares off into space. I'm like getting emotional even thinking of this moment. And he just kind of stares off and he gets choked up. And I've been there. It's like the whole career of the band is flashing before his eyes. We've been through it all. And it's just me and Ringo right now, and the uncertainty in his face, the sadness, the true sadness, it really hits you right here. And yeah, it's a very, very emotional moment. What this documentary really feels like to me is this legacy piece of work. Legacy in the sense that years from now, people will look back at this documentary and this will be the equivalent of someone having been able to film Beethoven or Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel. I honestly do believe that Lennon, McCartney as songwriters and the Beatles as a band will be remembered for all time. They will be talked about in all of the history books. And this is a documentation of what they were actually like, setting the record straight, seeing their true personalities. So for that reason, I was just so captivated as a Beatles fan watching this, because it makes you feel like you were just a fly on the wall, that you were in the room silently watching this all unfold, which is the closest you will ever be to seeing how the Beatles worked during this era of the band. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on the documentary, what you thought of their interactions, and how you thought the whole thing was presented. Please comment below, let me know your thoughts. And I really appreciate you watching this video. I was just kind of rambling here with my just thoughts. I wanted to just get them out because I really felt a connection to this documentary series. And I really hope that anyone who's into the Beatles or anyone who's in a band can watch this, because you'll get a lot out of it and it'll make you very humble in terms of what you have as a band or what you can strive towards as a band creatively and from a business standpoint. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and comment below, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.